Welcome back to Fundy Fridays. I'm James, and if you're new around these parts, my partner Jen and I talk about evangelical fundamentalism and conservative politics on this channel. I like to say she puts the fun back in fundamentalism, and I put the ick back into politics. Last time you saw me, we were taking way too deep a dive into the piss-yellow rose of Texas himself, Ted Cruz. Easily my most involved video to date. I had such a blast making it and really bringing you all a comprehensive overview of just what kind of terror they've got brewing down there in that big old state. But it did take a lot out of me, and in an effort to do something a little more in my wheelhouse, I've decided to seize my destiny and do something that I've wanted to do ever since the beginning of this year when I started learning how to make videos with Jen at all. I've gone on covering the conservative clusterfucks from a lot of different states while ignoring the fact that I myself live in the great state of Missouri, which just so happens to be a hotbed for those kinds of things. And you fine folks didn't seem to let this go unnoticed either. Every video I made, there was somebody in the comments asking me, James, when are you going to talk about Missouri? When are you going to talk about Missouri? It turns out that the Jennonites can smell a faker from a mile away.
You're a phony! Hey! This guy's a great big phony!
So with that in mind, I am incredibly proud to present to all of you today the very first ever episode of Missouri Business, a new series here on Fundy Fridays where I will be able to tell you all about the wacky, weird, and oftentimes woeful world of Missouri politics. And for sure, there are a lot of Missouri topics to cover. I mean, there is a reason we're going for a series instead of just one episode here. But in my opinion, this particular 2012 Senate race that we're going to be discussing today is a good microcosm of all of the political kinds of fuckiness you'll see in the state of Missouri. It's also an event that far outlasted its own time and still presents ripples in modern American politics that we can see today. Now, if you are aware of this situation and the players involved, I suspect that you are also aware of a major incident that occurred during the race, which came to define much of what we're going to review here today. While I promise we will cover that moment in greater detail, I wanted to make sure to provide a wider view of this Senate race than what I'm used to when I see it covered. The path to these comments is just as fascinating and dire as the comments themselves. The fierce competition between Missouri's last Democratic senator to date, Claire McCaskill, and her planted far-right opponent, Todd Akin, would go down in history as a game-changing moment, not just for Missouri, but for the country at large. Or, well, at least I think it should. And no, I am not being overdramatic. Okay, maybe that was a little overdramatic. I won't do that anymore. Now, recently, I know I've made a couple of videos where I would pit politicians against each other in hypothetical situations in what was really just kind of a literary device to try and show how similar they were. But let us all take a moment here and praise Missouri Jesus, for it is in his kick-assedness alone that today we are spared the same fate. For the first time here on Fundy Fridays, I actually get to talk about people who are different from one another, and only one of them's a complete shitbag even. So for the sake of preserving this nice little thing we've got going here, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the one I do like first. Claire McCaskill was born in Rolla, Missouri on July 24th, 1953, to parents William Young McCaskill Sr. and Betty Ann McCaskill. A couple of civic-minded go-getters in their own right, these two were absolutely the perfect pair of folks to raise a little policymaker in the, well, making. William Sr. would spend much of his career as a commissioner at the Missouri Department of Insurance, providing young Claire with an education on the grunt and detail work that it really does take to keep a government running. However, it would be her mother Betty Ann who would seem to cultivate Claire's interest in the political spotlight. Betty herself is a fascinating figure all on her own, and a true trailblazer in show-me state politics, having found inspiration in the state's most notable politician and a true innovator of war crimes, Dr. Bunsen Honeydew. Sorry about that. I meant Harry Truman. Sorry, I always get those two confused. But seriously, Betty would take the lessons of Harry Truman to heart and forge her own legacy in the state. This from Joe Mannies at St. Louis Public Radio. Betty Ann McCaskill was an active Democrat most of her life, the family said. She was inspired to get involved in politics after President Harry Truman delivered the commencement address at her University of Missouri graduation in 1950. In 1970, then Governor Warren Hearns appointed Betty Ann McCaskill to the Missouri Commission on the Status of Women in 1970. The family called the appointment her first official controversial post in her ongoing efforts to expand opportunities for women across Missouri in the fields of government and politics. In 1971, she became the first woman elected to the City Council of Columbia, Missouri. She also served on the board of trustees of her alma mater, William Woods University, including a stint as president. By 1978, the family had moved to Springfield, Missouri, where Betty Ann McCaskill made an unsuccessful bid for the Missouri General Assembly. Her GOP opponent was Leroy Blunt. Claire and her family would end up settling down in the aforementioned Columbia, Missouri, where Claire would graduate from the local David H. Hickman High School. Other notable alumni of this prestigious institution include Walmart founder Sam Walton, Enron CEO and corporate con man Kenneth Lay, and me, the guy literally hosting the video you're watching right now. Yes, sir, all four of us were proud Cupies at one time or another. Yes, I said Cupies. Yes, my high school mascot was some kind of Caucasian baby. No, it doesn't have any powers or special abilities that I'm aware of. Yes, other schools made fun of us at games and meets because our mascot was a baby. And no, I will not be taking any more questions about the Cupie. Claire would certainly make the most of her time in the Cupe Troop, though. She was a cheerleader, pep club president, and homecoming queen, along with part-time seamstress and drama nerd. She also participated in debate classes because, as we've already seen on this channel, that's just the place where today's opinionated teens go to become tomorrow's world leaders. Claire would graduate from Hickman, but stay true to her local roots, attending the University of Missouri-Columbia for both undergrad and law school, culminating in 1978 when she would graduate with her Juris Doctor. Please note that the University of Missouri's mascot, the Tiger, is overwhelmingly normal, which I suspect might have something to do with the fact that the local high school's mascot is some kind of off-putting infant. Notable alumni from this reasonably priced Midwestern safety school include World War Z heartthrob Brad Pitt, twang pop sensation and icon Sheryl Crow, and once again, me. Truly a hotbed of talent here in the heart of the cave state, isn't it? Also, Missourian to you all, but if you need a little bit of boost in your star power, give me a call. I'm something of a big deal on YouTube, so maybe I can help you out a little bit.
You have 4 Olympian gold medals.
Yeah.
Thank you, but you don't compare to me.
After graduation, Claire would have a cup of coffee in the Missouri Court of Appeals before settling into a longer-term position at the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office. That may not sound super impressive, but it's important to note that Jackson County encloses the Kansas City metro area and is the second most populated in all of Missouri behind only St. Louis. Now, I know, I've expressed my opinions about the police on this channel before, and I do certainly include all prosecutors in those sentiments. Now, to be fair, Claire specialized in arson cases, which is probably one of the least oppressive ways one can be a prosecutor, so that's something. And likely without this experience, she would have never been able to hold elected office at all. Claire wouldn't wait too awful long to follow her mother's lead, though, winning her first elected position in 1982 when she joined the Missouri General Assembly as a representative for the Brookside and Waldo neighborhoods in Kansas City. She credits her later political toughness and cunning to being a single woman in the densely sexist atmosphere of the Missouri General Assembly of the 1980s, as we can hear from this interview with NBC Kansas City reporter Stephen Dial.
Well, I gotta tell you, growing up in my career in a male-dominated profession has made me stronger and tougher. I always knew I had to be a little bit more prepared. I always knew I had to work a little harder. And so I have seen progress. I mean, when I began in the state legislature representing Waldo and Brookside, there were some tough times in Jefferson City. I was single, I was young, and I had to learn how to manage that. But with every barricade that was erected, it added fuel to my determination to do a little bit better and work a little bit harder.
Claire would serve in this position until 1988, when she would voluntarily resign from the General Assembly in order to go make fat stacks of cash at a private law firm. But it wouldn't be long before the siren's call of elected office would woo her back. Claire would move into Jackson County politics starting in 1990, first winning a position on the county legislature. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of like if a county had its own House of Representatives. That may sound like a bit of municipal overkill, but trust me, I can tell you that the barbecue disputes do require a bit of extra governance. And Claire wouldn't stay in this small spotlight for long either, running in 1992 for the more prestigious Jackson County prosecutor position. She would win that election and serve in the prosecutorial role until 1998, and I'm sure that the entire time she was completely fair to absolutely everyone and totally didn't enforce our otherwise comically unfair justice system. Once again, though, Claire would parlay her legal experience into a run for higher office, this time pursuing the open state auditor position resigned by Margaret B. Kelly, who was herself the first woman ever elected to statewide public office in Missouri. Claire would claim victory in this election over Republican challenger Chuck Pierce by a relatively narrow margin for the time, given that prior to George W. Bush's term in office, Missouri tended to lean somewhat Democratic. Pierce cited his own conservative stance on riverboat gambling as the reason he was unable to best Claire, which is a pretty key issue in a state that only allows casinos to be built on riverboats for some reason. And then, in 2002, Claire would win re-election over an even dumber issue, if you can believe it. In 2002, for some reason, Missouri Republicans decided that they absolutely hated mainstream state auditor candidate Jay Kanzler, and instead chose candidate Al Hansen with 65% of the primary vote. Problem was, Al Hansen was a rather controversial figure, and for a particularly damning reason at that, as we'll see in this article from David A. Lieb, coming from the world's best-named newspaper, the Edwardsville Intelligencer. Like most candidates, Al Hansen bases his campaign for Missouri auditor on his experience. It's just not the kind of experience voters expect. At age 72, the Republican has never served a day in elected office, but he served 9 months in prison for a pair of felony fraud convictions 24 years ago. Hansen says he would be the perfect man to catch fraud as the state auditor, having committed it himself. I don't want to use the argument it takes one to know one, but it's an experience factor, said Hansen, who now runs a prison ministry from his Concordia home. Luckily, back in 2002, though, Missouri hadn't fully committed to losing its mind at a statewide level, and Claire was able to coast to victory against Hansen in the general election. So in essence, she got a major boost when a member of the opposing party's radical fringe took a surprise victory in the primary, only to flop in the general election.
What's that behind your ear? Is that a... Yes, it is. It's a pin. Let's take the pin and put it in this conversation. Boop.
Riding high off this victory, though, Claire wasted little time in capitalizing on her ever-expanding civic profile and declared her candidacy for the 2004 gubernatorial race in Missouri. This was a particularly bold move on her part, given the fact that, at the time, the Democrats already controlled the governorship through incumbent Bob Holden. But this was a move that sort of made sense and ended up paying off for Claire. Holden was far from popular in the state at the time, even with his fellow Democrats, thanks in large part to a public perception of extreme ineffectiveness and a $1 million inauguration party he threw for himself to kick off his term. And when Claire stunned the whole state and primaried him out, it really seemed at the time like she had made the right call. Unfortunately, though, on the other side of that primary stood one tough opponent in fast-rising Republican star Matt Blunt. The 33-year-old Blunt was a dream come true for the Missouri GOP at the time. He had it all: a trusted family name, a decorated military career, and terms in both the Missouri General Assembly and as Missouri Secretary of State. Not even to mention the fact that it was his own Grandpa Leroy that knocked Betty Ann McCaskill out of the General Assembly. Matt was, by all accounts, a very worthy final boss for Claire. Now, to Claire's credit, she did give it her all, and she showed that blend of folksy, homegrown candor and sharp political strategy that would come to define the rest of her career, as we can see in her closing remarks from that year's gubernatorial debate.
The question is, who's prepared for this job and who can bring real change? And this isn't about age. Yes, I'm 51 years old and Matt Blunt is 33, but it's not about chronological age. It's about experience. I've learned an awful lot since I was 33 years old. As a legislator, working with Republican lawmakers and a Republican governor, I passed dozens of bills protecting victims of crime, lengthening sentences for violent offenders, receiving national awards and even state awards for my legislative work. As Jackson County prosecutor, I created the Domestic Violence Unit, the Drug Court, neighborhood prosecution efforts, creative, innovative programs that made our streets safer, our system tougher, and still with more sensitivity for crime victims. I put more people in the penitentiary than any other prosecutor in this state. And as your state auditor, I've done a record-breaking 700 audits. I've been willing to step on anybody's toes to save you money. And newspaper after newspaper has cited my job as effective and fiercely independent. And in my personal life, I've learned a lot. I started my own business and felt the pressure of making a payroll. I cared for my father as he was dying. I had 3 wonderful children that gave my life meaning and purpose. And I struggled with the challenges of being a single mom with 3 kids that were very young.
In the end, it wouldn't be enough, though, and Claire would come up short against this wunderkind in the election, her first ever defeat in a race for public office. But if you think that slowed her down, you haven't been paying attention. Claire would bounce right back from this gubernatorial loss to take an immediate shot at the Senate in 2006, this time facing Republican incumbent Senator Jim Talent. This particular contest is what I would call the most standard I've ever covered here on Fundy Fridays. Both Claire and Jim would cruise to victory in their respective primaries and run stable, issues-driven campaigns that featured a balance of hot-button national issues like the war in Afghanistan or abortion rights with more localized concerns. These were the kind of pedantic snooze-fest debates that I think people are pining for nowadays in our post-Trump world. The only notable thing I was able to find in either of the debates was this moment where Claire took a rather pointed jab at a pair of very influential Democratic power players.
You're having Bill Clinton come in to raise money for you. Do you think Bill Clinton was a great president?
I do. I think I have a lot of problems with some of his personal issues. I said at the time, I think he's been a great leader, but I don't want my daughter near him.
Well, damn, Claire, tell him how you really feel. Although, honestly, I think this was just her attempt to make sure she didn't get boiled down to the Midwest's attempt to draw Hillary Clinton from memory. Still, Claire would defeat Talent in a close, challenging race and begin her first term as Missouri's junior senator in 2006, taking her formal leap onto the national stage. Claire would spend her first term cultivating what I call a legacy of defiant centrism. This absolutely fantastic set of composite ranking tables created by Ryan Morris and Peter Bell of the National Journal show her from the period from 2006 to 2012 to have been the 50th most liberal senator and the 51st most conservative senator at the time. Ever the trailblazer, Claire was the epitome of the term mid before it was even part of the lexicon.
It's called the Midwest because every single thing in it is mid.
One area where Claire did stand out, though, was her early and ardent support for the then-rising Barack Obama during the 2008 presidential primary season. As Claire tells it, her daughter Maddie was the one that challenged her to turn this private adoration into a public endorsement for a candidate that really needed it at the time. This from David Von Drehl at Time. The senator's daughter, Maddie Esposito, had seen the way her mother teared up whenever she heard Obama speak. And now it was happening again, as mother and daughter sat side by side on the family room sofa in a suburb of St. Louis, watching the results of the Iowa caucuses on TV. "You know you believe in him," Maddie admonished her damp-eyed mother. "It's time to step up." The next morning, Maddie, a college freshman home for the holidays, added a threat. "You have to do it, or I'm never talking to you again." And in fact, Maddie seemed to have been onto something. Claire's endorsement was a key piece in Obama's rise to power, notably for delivering him an important primary win in the state of Missouri. And Claire would maintain this staunch Obamism as he took over the presidency, particularly providing key votes for both the ACA in 2009 and the DREAM Act in 2010. Unfortunately, though, this period from 2008 to 2010 was one of dramatic political shift in the United States, which culminated in the disastrous red wave midterm election of 2010. Claire realized that she wasn't as likely to win her 2012 re-election effort on the back of a safe, stable campaign built from experience and relatability. Furthermore, her investment in Obama definitely backfired as Missouri emerged to be one of the states shifting most quickly into its new identity as a Republican stronghold. No, this time Claire would have to get creative, clever, and cunning in order to preserve her seat. And that is where we move to the next part of our story. Chapter 2. The Challenger. Todd Akin's journey to the 2012 Senate race stands in stark contrast to the homegrown, neighborly image that Claire created for herself. In fact, It's in such stark contrast that it doesn't even start in the state of Missouri. Born William Todd Akin in New York City on July 5th, 1947, Todd would spend little of his young life in the Big Apple before being relocated to St. Louis. From there, he would live a comfortable life of privilege as his Harvard-educated father would take over the family's profitable Laclede steel manufacturing business. Todd's education would only come from the most expensive private schools. First, the prestigious John Burroughs School in St. Louis, followed by the Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts, where he would complete a Bachelor's of Management Engineering. From here, Todd would enlist in the Army, where he would enlist for 4 years, serving in an engineering capacity. He would retire from there and work for a tick in Daddy's steel mill before, I can only assume, having a complete crisis of faith and running off to the Covenant Theological Seminary located in Creve Coeur, Missouri. Fun fact, Creve Coeur means broken heart in French, and I just think that's a really cool name for a town. Todd would complete his Master's of Divinity in 1984, which is a degree that would traditionally lead one to some kind of ministry or pastoral career. But Todd took an unorthodox route after graduating, getting arrested at so many abortion protests that it might as well have been his job. The first of the events, according to the newspaper's archives, was on March 15, 1985. 19 anti-abortion demonstrators who refused to leave the waiting room of an abortion clinic in the Central West End were carried out by St. Louis police officers Friday morning, read the next day's newspaper. Among those arrested, according to the story, was William Akin, 37, of a Creve Coeur address. The age and address are consistent with other information the newspaper has about Todd Akin. 3 weeks later, another 6 protesters, including Akin, were arrested at another St. Louis demonstration. Police had to carry Akin into an elevator, the story read. On April 5, 1985, Akin was arrested for a third time, one of 10 protesters who were attempting to block entrances at Hope Clinic for Women in Granite City, according to the paper. One clinic employee told the paper that the protesters caused minor damage and leveled verbal abuse at women entering the clinic. And this was just the first report of his arrests. More would be dug up later. Akin was arrested on October 26, 1985, April 19, 1986, and February 28, 1987 for trespassing. A December 27, 1986 arrest was for trespassing and peace disturbance. The arrests reported by the Post-Dispatch came in the same period, between March 1985 and May 1987, but occurred at other clinics. 3 were in St. Louis and 1 in Granite City, Illinois. The paper said protesters tried to block access to the clinics and refused to leave. In one case, Akin was carried out by the police. So at this point it may be obvious, but I still feel the need to mention that Todd Akin is far and away the most fundy politician I've covered on the channel up to this point. I know you usually expect the hard fundamentalists to be Gen episodes, but Todd's just an exception here. If we take a look at the fundometer, you can see that unlike the MAGA minions or even Ted Cruz, he's scoring pretty high up into the red there, indicating critical levels of fundamentalism. So, what do you think my lovely state decided to do with this whiny trust fund baby turned Planned Parenthood speed bump? Well, obviously they decided to send him to the Missouri House of Representatives, where he would be able to make his weird hang-ups about reproductive health care the entire state's problem. Yes, less than 1 full year after his last arrest for trespassing at an abortion clinic, Todd would throw his hat into the ring to represent Missouri's 85th district in St. Charles. He would hold this position for 12 years, often running unopposed and generally never facing anything we could call real competition for the seat. And with all that incredible power, you can be assured that Todd did focus on the important issues of the time. I'm just kidding. He tried to pull funding from school nurses so they couldn't talk about abortion. Governor Mel Carnahan blamed anti-choice extremists for the death of legislation authorizing a 3rd year of state funding for scores of nurses in public, private, and parochial schools. But opponents of the legislation said the pro-choice governor was refusing to put a wall of separation between public funds and abortions by declining to accept a House amendment barring abortion referrals by the nurses. Representative Todd Akin of St. Louis, and sponsor of the amendment attached to the now dead bill, said the question was simple. Will we use state money in such a way that the state becomes a sales agent for the abortion industry? But thanks to that wonderful combination of religious fervor and good old political ennui, Todd would end his term in the Missouri House and graduate to a position in the federal House. This from John Elligan at the New York Times. Mr. Akin was first elected to the Missouri House in 1988, and much of his base in his early years as a legislator came from being a part of a network of parents who homeschooled their children. All 6 of his children were homeschooled. His election to Congress in 2000 was a stroke of good fortune, local political analysts said. He was seen as an outside candidate in a 5-way Republican primary that he won by only 56 votes, in part because the more moderate candidates cut into each other's tally. Ted would go on to beat State Senator Ted House for the seat by a 13-point victory margin, the smallest he would ever face in the also 12 years that he would occupy this seat. And so now Todd had a national platform with which to spew his rage at women and their reproductive rights.
We have one of the most polarizing issues that has confronted our nation since the days of slavery. And yet, just as slavery is fundamentally un-American, so even more so, anything that violates the most fundamental right, the right to life, is contrary to everything that Americans have stood for and fought for. The right to liberty is to be able to follow your own conscience without being terrorized by some opponent. So it is no big surprise that we fight the terrorists, because they are fundamentally un-American, and yet we have terrorists in our own culture called abortionists. And what sort of places do these bottom-of-the-food chain doctors work in? Places that are really a pit. You find that along with the culture of death go all kinds of other law-breaking. The not following good sanitary procedure, giving abortions to women who are not actually pregnant.
Yep, you heard it here first, everyone. Liberals are out there giving abortions to women who ain't even pregnant. Won't someone think of the non-existent children? And yet we all must remember, conservative hubris is a monster that can never be underestimated. Sensing the shifting political tides that we all talked about in the red wave of 2010, Todd saw his opportunity and went for it, declaring his candidacy for the upcoming Republican Senate primary to challenge Claire for her seat in 2012. And so it is here where our 2 competitors will finally meet face to face on the battlefield for the first time. Chapter 3. The Contest. Now, it's important to note that at the beginning of primary season, Todd was not the GOP frontrunner, far from it, in fact. Notably, 2 more prominent candidates stood in his way, former state treasurer Sarah Steelman and St. Louis toiletry magnate John Bruner. The first to declare for the race, Steelman focused on her accomplishments as treasurer and her political clout, and notably she picked up one very valuable and entertaining endorsement for the time.
Hi, I'm Governor Sarah Palin. We get America back on track by sending true conservatives like Sarah Steelman to Washington. Sarah is an economist who defends our tax dollars like a mama grizzly defends her cubs.
On the other side, Brunner touted his local recognition and business acumen as the head of his family's Vision personal care brand, notable for being the manufacturers of Germex.
I'm John Bruner. For 100 years, our family business has manufactured products found in most homes. But you know, America's losing its manufacturing base, and Washington is making it worse with uncontrolled spending, massive debt, and regulations that cost jobs.
And so it would seem that these 2 more mainstream established candidates were more than happy to fight amongst each other and allow Todd to occupy the race as the fringe favorite that ultimately goes on to lose. While Todd certainly tried to keep the focus on his diligent fiscal conservatism,
Todd Akin co-sponsored the balanced budget amendment and was named a taxpayer hero for opposing wasteful spending. Only Todd Akin voted against government bailouts, against wasteful stimulus spending, against budget-busting Obamacare.
Todd was already somewhat thought to be the race's long-shot wackadoo candidate. Meanwhile, Claire was running unopposed in her Democratic primary and yet seemed to be sweating more over an upcoming election than she ever had before. Missouri had shifted hard into the red since she first won her seat in 2006. And formerly safe Democrats like her were now at the mercy of an emerging far-right movement taking control of the state. But Claire is nothing if not a savvy student of political strategy, and I expect no one in the state likely kept as close an eye on their competition as she did. Claire knew that she would struggle against either Steelman or Bruner. Both of these candidates maintained a proper blend of Tea Party-influenced anti-taxation extremism with solid, legitimate backgrounds that undecided voters could trust. On the other hand, Claire knew that Todd was a true zealot and much farther out onto the evangelical fringe than even most people in the state realized at the time. Steelman and Brunner, they were really unlikely to foul up the race with any unpalatable opinions and beliefs they might have. But if given the chance, Todd very well may slip and reveal his true and very unpalatable beliefs to the general election voters. Hell, he'd already done it once in June of 2011 when he made this rather intense claim about atheists while on the radio show of fellow conservative zealot Tony Perkins.
Why would NBC do this?
Well, I think NBC has a long record of being very liberal. And at the heart of liberalism, it really is a hatred for God.
Oh, and by the way, please know that the thing that was bothering Todd there was NBC's removal of Under God from the Pledge of Allegiance that led off a figure skating tournament. If something like that prompts such a response from Todd, just imagine what he could do with a really controversial question. And in the chaos of this white-hot GOP primary, Claire saw opportunity. If she was going to lose her Democratic advantage, she could at least level the playing field by forcing the Republicans into the worst possible position she could. And so, in July of 2012, just a month out from the primary election, we started seeing ads in the state like this.
I'm Claire McCaskill, and I approve this message.
The most conservative congressman in Missouri, as our senator, Todd Akin. A crusader against bigger government, Akin would completely eliminate the departments of education and energy and privatize Social Security. Todd's pro-family agenda would outlaw many forms of contraception, and Akin alone says President Obama is a complete menace to our civilization. Todd Akin, Missouri's true conservative, is just too conservative.
So here's something you all should know about primaries. Normal people don't tend to care about them. The people who take the time to vote in 2 elections in 1 year are the ones who really care about their choices come November. And for Republicans, that meant hardline Tea Party activists looking for the most conservative candidate they could find. Furthermore, there is no law saying that Claire's not allowed to just act like Todd's already won. If she thinks he's going to win and she wants to get out ahead during her uncontested primary, she's allowed to do that. And furthermore, she may just be an upright Missourian who doesn't want such a terrible candidate to get the election and is earnestly trying to push conservative voters away from him. But while an ad like that might work against Todd in the general election, it only served to make him a rock star in the primary. Republican voters at the time loved how Todd's fierce conservative views seemed to terrify Claire. Haha, take that, Claire. You don't like him? We're going to vote for him even more now. And just like that, Claire McCaskill seized the moment in an uncontested primary to pilot a bold new political strategy, choosing your own opponent.
Who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? Oh yeah, it is my bitch.
And when the dust settled on August 7th of 2012, the outcome was clear. Missouri's most conservative voters had gotten their guy. So Todd moves forward to the general election, and all that's left for Claire to do is bide her time and wait until he himself implodes the campaign with moderate Republicans and swing voters. She wouldn't have to wait long, though I doubt she was aware of just how momentous the downfall would be when it happened. Chapter 4. The Statement. Just 12 days removed from his primary victory on August 19th of 2012, Todd would grant an interview to the Missouri local KTVI news station, where he was asked his opinions regarding abortion law. I want you all to know that I'm just going to play this clip in its entirety because it is an important moment in American history and it is absolutely central to understanding all that we've talked about here today. But I do feel the need to give a strong content warning for sexual assault.
If an abortion could be considered in a case of, say, a tubal pregnancy or something like that, what about in the case of rape? Should it be legal or not?
Well, you know, people always want to try and make that as one of those things. Well, how do you slice this particularly tough sort of ethical question? It seems to me, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, that's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down. But let's assume that maybe that didn't work or something. You know, I think there should be some punishment, but the punishment ought to be on the rapist and not attacking the child.
Now, I feel like those aren't necessarily comments we need to spend too much time dissecting here. They're plenty awful, right on their face, no digging required. Even beyond the startling scientific inaccuracy, the callousness and sexism of a statement like that was just too loud for anyone to ignore. I really think at this point we can just say, "Fuck you, Todd," and move on. The response was both swift and massive, and unlike what we might expect from today's politicians, almost universally negative towards Todd and his incorrect extremist views. Claire, ever the opportunist, didn't waste any time either taking the reins of the anti-Todd brigade. Because the thing is, this is what Claire wanted. This is what she prepared for. She actively sought to throw a wrench into the GOP Senate machine, and she thought Todd was the tool that she could use to make it happen. The problem was, Todd Akin was less of a monkey wrench and more of a hand grenade. Now, I don't want to make it sound like she was at all inappropriate in this response she had. She absolutely had to hammer him for these comments and was in the best position to do so. And I think she did it in the best way she possibly could, by giving survivors of sexual assault their own platform on her dime to talk about just how much Todd's comments hurt them personally.
I'm a Republican and a pro-life mother and a rape survivor. In the hospital, I was offered emergency contraception. Because of my personal beliefs, I declined. Here's what else I believe. No woman should be denied that choice. What Todd Akin said is offensive, but what he believes is worse. He would criminalize emergency contraception. I've never voted for Claire McCaskill, but because of Todd Akin, I will now.
For reference, this ad we just saw was one of a 3-part series that Claire released, giving survivors a chance to speak directly about how much Todd's words had hurt them. While this incident may have arisen from political motivations, the fallout for survivors was very real, and it appears that Claire took that as seriously as she needed to. But more notable, her response was almost unnecessary. This statement made by Todd didn't just offend the sensibilities of Missourians, but of all Americans. And while Claire may have been the party lead on taking Todd to task over them, she was far from the only, or even the most powerful Democrat to do so.
Let me first of all say the views expressed were offensive. Rape is rape. And the idea that we should be parsing and qualifying and slicing what types of rape we're talking about doesn't make sense to the American people, and certainly doesn't make sense to me.
And that doesn't even account for the GOP response. Calls for Todd to drop out of the race came almost immediately and from the highest levels of his own party, including their presidential nominee for that year, along with the party's chairman. This from Aliyah Shahid at MSNBC. Reince Priebus worries that Republicans' years-long quest to retake the Senate could be upended by the biologically stupid Todd Akin. The Republican National Committee chairman forcefully reiterated the GOP establishment's call for the Missouri Senate nominee, under fire for his recent comments on legitimate rape, to drop out of the race. "I think he should get out of the race," Priebus told CNN's Candy Crowley on Sunday morning. "He's got to put the mission of liberty and freedom ahead of himself." When Crowley initially described Akin's recent remarks about rape and pregnancy, Priebus declared, "I call it biologically stupid." And when asked if Akin could cost the Republicans the Senate, Priebus said, "Sure, absolutely." Now, Todd absolutely refused to drop out of the race, although he would acknowledge the blunder and spend the rest of the campaign trying to do damage control. He would create his own ad with a survivor, which apparently went over so well that now it's been made private on YouTube. And then there was his woefully inadequate formal apology.
I'm Todd Akin, and I approve this message. Rape is an evil act. I used the wrong words in the wrong way, and for that I apologize. As the father of 2 daughters, I want tough justice for predators. I have a compassionate heart for the victims of sexual assault, and I pray for them. The fact is, rape can lead to pregnancy. The truth is, rape has many victims. The mistake I made was in the words I said, not in the heart I hold. I ask for your forgiveness.
The few endorsements Todd had left after this came from people even farther out on the red fringe than himself. This included folks like Representative Steve King of Iowa, infamous for his "America is for white babies" shtick, and Stacey Campbell, a notably white GOP state senator from Tennessee whose big claim to fame at the time was his attempt to join the state's Black Caucus because of, affirmative action or something. Others tried to focus more on making sure Claire would lose rather than making sure Todd would win, conveniently ignoring the fact that this was a zero-sum game where only one of those outcomes could be true. Ads like this we'll see here from Rand Paul's Brand PAC came through big organizations to preserve their candidates' plausible deniability and their connection to Todd while making Claire look as bad as they possibly could.
Millions of people are out of work and our debt keeps climbing. But Claire McCaskill works with Barack Obama to send our money overseas to radicals who attack our embassies, burn our flag, and kill our diplomats. What would you do? It's time to bring our tax dollars home and send Claire McCaskill home too. Paid for by Rand PAC.
But even these kinds of ads were few in number, half-hearted, and overwhelmingly drowned out by the anti-Akin chorus. And in the end, Claire's innovative new political strategy would be seen to its completion as she would claim a definitive, yet still incredibly disappointing, 15-point win over Todd in the general election. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The fallout for Todd was simply insurmountable, and he would never again hold public office or, as far as my research could tell, any kind of public-facing position again. His final act of significance as a public figure came with the 2014 release of his smarmy, sniveling biography, Firing Back. In this book, Todd would formally recant his prior apology for the remarks, although given the disgusting smile he has on the cover, I don't really think he needed to. And on October 4th of 2021, Todd would pass away from prostate cancer, writing the last chapter in his own deservedly tragic tale. In regards to Todd's passing, I am simply going to leave up this quote, which comes to us exclusively from Missouri's most famous wordsmith, Mark Twain, and absolutely no one else. But even in death, Todd's legacy of gross sexism and political failure lives on. Earlier this very year, Republican candidate Yesley Vega of Virginia's 7th District used ever so slightly different words to horrifyingly bring Todd's views of pregnancy by rape into a modern context.
Now, the left will say, well, what about in cases of rape or incest? I'm a law enforcement officer. I became a police officer in 2011. I've worked one case where as a result of a rape, the young woman became pregnant.
Really?
And it's my job, number one, as a believer, right, to give you all of the resources available.
Right.
Only this time, the outcry was minimal at best, and you can take that for what you will. Claire's legacy, however, is very different from the righteous fate that fell upon Todd's head, and I would argue much more complicated. Following her victory, she would serve dutifully her term from 2012 to 2018, although admittedly without anything I would call a standout accomplishment. The thing she ended up being most known for was burying the hatchet with Hillary Clinton and acting as one of her primary Midwestern surrogates during the failed 2016 presidential campaign. And in fact, Donald Trump's victory in 2016 was a harbinger of a new political world, one that seems to have no place for a steadfast, centrist Democrat from the heartland like Claire anymore. She would finish out her term with a whimper, coming up short in the 2018 Senate race to future episode of this series, Josh Hawley. And between his victory and Roy Blunt's ascension to senior senator following Claire's ousting, Missouri was left without a Democratic senator for the first time in over a decade. Claire would move on to a career in political analysis. Claire would move on to a career in political punditry and broadcasting, taking an analyst role with MSNBC that she still has to this day. While she still flirts with DC life and maintains active engagement with a variety of public causes, she now seems content with her role on the sideline of American politics. But given everything that's taken place in our country since 2012, I'm struggling to rectify my formerly high regard for McCaskill with the stark reality of what her winning strategy meant for the rest of us once it had been seen to its completion. Claire knew that she couldn't play to her strengths to beat Sarah Steelman or John Brunner. And like any good tactician, I suppose she just pivoted to a novel and winning strategy when the opportunity presented itself. From a political standpoint, Claire's pick-your-opponent maneuver was a well-justified gambit and a legendary piece of political gamesmanship that is still taught in political science classes to this day. The problem is, This shit is not a game. Politics is much more complicated than any game of strategy, and it will always come with much higher stakes. One can't lose sight of long-term ramifications in this field without risking real harmful consequences for people who need the government's protection the most. And I think that's where Claire messed up bad. Sure, Todd wasn't able to win the general election, just like Claire had predicted. But even by being on that election stage at all, his horrifying views were normalized and broadcast to an entire state over and over again. And the people that voted for him suddenly saw their bar for acceptable political behavior dropped into a deep hole that I don't think it ever came out of. To me, the line between this 2012 election and the 2016 presidential election is just too difficult to ignore. I don't think it is implausible at all to say that the 2012 normalization of Todd Akin had a profound impact on the incredible red shift that has taken place in Missouri since that election occurred. Simply put, did Claire help get Republicans ready to vote for a sexist pig like Trump in 2016 by giving them a practice run voting for a sexist pig in 2012? Furthermore, Claire knew that Todd was a controversial zealot. Hell, that's why she picked him for this. She knew what he was, and yet she still was instrumental in giving him the national platform that he used to degrade and belittle the trauma of survivors of sexual assault all around the world. That may have been acceptable collateral damage for Claire, but it wasn't for the survivors who had to hear Todd's words in the news over and over. While his comments and opinions aren't her fault, I can't help but wonder how many people could have been spared from re-traumatization if she had thought her strategy through more thoroughly. And I know that some of you may be thinking, well, James, it was an important election. She had to win. What did you want her to do? Just lose? No. I would have wanted her to do better. Claire was a good politician, and she didn't need a risky desperation shot like this to win. Claire had another choice in this whole thing that I think all too often gets ignored. She could have prepared strategies for all three of the frontrunners in that year's GOP primary. She could have used her uncontested primary time to practice and build her strategy for whatever debates may come. And she could have gotten out and pounded the pavement harder to try and live up to that homegrown image she keeps trying to sell us.
You know, I come from Missouri. It's what I am, it's who I am. It is what keeps me going. It's what lifts me up. I look at my job as what can I do every day to get something done for the people of Missouri.
But instead, Claire decided that she just couldn't do any better than she was already doing. And rather than try to improve her campaign or build a stronger connection with Missouri voters, she instead chose to play the game, take the easy way out, and saddle all of us with this jackass. And for her one election win, Todd's views would permanently gain a public profile. Is that a fair trade? I honestly don't think so. In the end, I will stand by my statement in the beginning of the video. Todd is the only shitbag here, may he rest in piss. And at the end of it all, I still fundamentally believe that Claire was a good politician who just wanted to win too badly and couldn't see the forest for the trees. A sin, and certainly one with dire consequences. But, at the end, also a forgivable one. But while she may herself not be a shitbag, Claire put herself in a position to be permanently shitbag adjacent. And that's an arrangement that's bound to leave some stains on any clean reputation. Whether she likes it or not, whether it's even fair at all, Claire McCaskill's legacy will forever be tied to Todd Akin, the lunatic she empowered so she could win. Whew, that was another heavy one. Thank you all for sticking around. I think this one's going to be a little shorter, although I haven't edited it at the time I'm recording this one, so if it isn't or is long, don't laugh at me too much. Thank you all so much, as always, for your continued viewership. Had a blast chatting with all of you during the Ted Cruz episode live premiere. That was so fun. I've been getting a ton of great messages about that. If you really like what we do here, please subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a lot, and if you really, really like what we do, hit that like icon on this video and that little bell icon so you get notified anytime we put out something new. Please check out our Patreon in the description, where for just $3 you can get access to monthly patron-exclusive live streams. You can also check out our Bonfire store for tons of awesome merch, including our coffee cup Greg Locke shirts, Dunking Darlings, I think they're called. We are still donating a portion of all the proceeds from this shirt to a variety of pro-choice organizations and causes, and I felt like it was a really good shirt to wear during the Todd Akin episode. And beyond all that, once again, just thank you all so much. I loved all the Jennonites to the end of the world and back. I'm getting a little emotional. Just thank you for everything, and I can't wait to see y'all in December. Take care and happy holidays.
That Kansas City barbecue, I could eat my fill. Hear those sounds out of Branson echo through the